Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The ground beneath Ed's feet trembled as he sprinted across the fields toward the village. Ominous clouds gathered overhead, swirling in dark formations that had not been seen for 1,000 years. His heart pounded in his chest, not from the running, but from the deep sense of dread that had lodged itself in his bones ever since the comet known as the Demon's Eye streaked across the sky 2 nights ago. He had felt something inside him stir that night, a darkness, a whisper in his soul that wasn't there before. The villagers had talked of the ancient prophecy, about the Demon King selecting his heir from among humans every millennium, but Ed never paid attention to such stories. They were myths, legends meant to frighten children. Now, as the ground shook and the sky roared, he feared there was truth behind the tales. He stumbled into the village square, gasping for breath. The villagers were already gathered, their faces pale with terror, their eyes wide as they stared at the sky. Above them, a dark vortex was forming, twisting the very fabric of the heavens. Ed, Ed! A voice called out, piercing through the chaos. He turned to see his friend, Lyra, pushing her way through the crowd. Her cloak billowed in the wind, and her face was as white as the clouds overhead. "What's happening?" Ed asked, though deep down, he knew the answer. "It's you, Ed," Lyra said, grabbing his arm and pulling him closer. "The prophecy, it's you. You've been chosen." He recoiled, shaking his head. That can't be true. I don't want any of this." But the voice in his head whispered otherwise. It had been speaking to him more frequently since the comet passed, coaxing him, promising him power beyond imagination. And now, as the vortex opened wider, a figure began to descend, a silhouette of darkness, wreathed in flame and shadow. It hovered above the village, its eyes glowing red, and its voice boomed across the land. "Ed of the human kingdom," the figure called, its voice echoing through every corner of Ed's mind. "You have been chosen as the heir to my throne. Come forth and claim your birthright." The villagers cowered, some falling to their knees in prayer, others backing away in fear. Ed stood frozen, his fists clenched, his heart pounding in his ears. "I'm not your heir," Ed muttered through gritted teeth. The figure's laughter filled the air. "You cannot deny your destiny, boy. The power is already within you. You feel it, don't you?" Ed shuddered as the darkness within him pulsed, a wave of energy rippling through his body. His breath quickened, and for a moment, he could see the future the Demon King promised. A world under his control, where he wielded unimaginable power, where he ruled over both humans and demons alike. He saw kingdoms fall, armies bow before him, and his name spoken in reverence and fear. But the vision turned darker. He saw himself standing on a throne made of bones, his once human face twisted and unrecognizable, his heart consumed by the very power he thought he could control. "No," Ed growled, shaking his head to rid himself of the vision. "I won't become a monster." The figure above him narrowed its glowing eyes. "You cannot fight what you are. The power will consume you, whether you embrace it or not. The only choice you have is how you will use it." Before Ed could respond, Lyra pulled him aside. "We have to go, now." She dragged him toward the edge of the village, her grip tight on his arm. Behind them, the villagers were scattering, their panic palpable in the air. The dark figure did not pursue, but its voice echoed in Ed's mind. "You cannot escape your fate, Ed. You are mine." They ran until they reached the forest on the outskirts of the village, where the towering trees offered some semblance of shelter from the chaos unfolding above. Ed collapsed against a tree, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. Lyra crouched beside him, her eyes filled with concern. "We can't stay here," she said. "If the demon lords know you're the chosen one, they'll come for you. You need to leave and go somewhere they can't find you." "I don't understand," Ed muttered, staring at his hands. "Why me? I'm nobody. Why would the Demon King choose me?" Lyra hesitated, her brow furrowed. "Maybe it's because you're stronger than you think. Or maybe it's because you're not willing to give in." Ed laughed bitterly. "I can feel it inside me, Lyra. The power is already there. and it's growing. I don't know how much longer I can resist. You're not alone, Lyra said softly. There are others who can help you. There's a Placia, an old warrior who knows about these things. His name is Gain. He fought against the demons years ago. If anyone knows how to fight this, it's him. Ed's gaze flicked toward her, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time. Where is he? He lives deep in the mountains, Lyra said. It'll be a long journey, but we have no choice. We need to leave now, before the demon lords send their forces. The thought of leaving everything behind weighed heavily on Ed's mind. His village, his friends, it would all be lost if he left. But he knew staying was not an option. The power inside him was growing stronger by the hour, and if he couldn't control it, he would become the very thing he feared. I'll go, Ed said quietly. But I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder. You're stronger than you realize, Ed. The fact that you haven't given in yet proves that. You just need to believe in yourself. Ed nodded, though doubt still gnawed at the edges of his mind. The power inside him pulsed again, a dark and dangerous force that threatened to overwhelm him at any moment. He had to keep moving, had to stay ahead of the demons that would surely be hunting him. But more than that, he had to learn how to control the power before it consumed him completely. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks shrouded in mist. Ed and Lyra had been traveling for days, moving swiftly through forests and across barren plains. The demon's presence was never far from Ed's mind, its voice a constant whisper in the back of his thoughts. You cannot run forever. The power inside him was growing, and with it, the temptation. He could feel the raw energy at his fingertips, just waiting to be unleashed. A single thought, a single moment of weakness, and he knew he could destroy anything in his path. But he held back, fighting the urge to give in, knowing that once he crossed that line, there would be no turning back. Lyra remained by his side, her quiet strength a source of comfort. She had told him stories of Gain, the warrior who had once led an army against the demon lords. If anyone could teach Ed how to control the power, it was him. As they approached the base of the mountains, a figure emerged from the mist, a tall, weathered man with silver hair and a scar across his face. He carried a sword on his back and walked with the confidence of someone who had faced death many times and survived. You must be Cain, Lyra called out. The man nodded, his eyes sharp as they appraised Ed. I heard you were coming. The demons have been restless since the comet passed. You're the reason, aren't you? Ed swallowed, feeling the weight of the old warrior's gaze. I didn't ask for this. No one ever does, Cain replied. But it doesn't matter. The power is inside you now, and you'll have to learn how to control it before it controls you. I don't want it, Ed said, his voice shaking. I don't want any of this. Cain's expression softened slightly. It's not about what you want. It's about what you choose to do with it. The warrior led them to a small cabin nestled in the mountains, far from the prying eyes of both men and demons. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of herbs and burning incense. Cain gestured for Ed to sit. Tell me everything, Cain said, his tone grave. Ed hesitated before recounting the events of the past few days. The voices, the visions, the power that surged within him. Cain listened silently, his brow furrowed in thought. The Demon King's power is unlike anything you've ever faced, Cain said once Ed had finished. It corrupts, consumes. Every heir before you has fallen to it. The fact that you are still resisting is a good signal, but it won't last forever. Ed sat in silence, Cain's words weighing heavily on him. The old warrior's weathered face was set in a hard, knowing expression, as though he had seen countless souls wrestle with the same torment now tearing Ed apart. The air in the small cabin seemed thick with tension, each breath Ed took dragging the weight of Cain's ominous warning deeper into his chest. How am I supposed to fight this? Ed asked finally, his voice small, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of the wooden table. It's inside me, Cain. Every time I try to push it away, it pulls me in deeper. Cain's eyes never wavered as he leaned forward, his rough hands resting on the table between them. You don't fight it, Ed, you master it. There's a difference. Every heir before you thought they could reject the power, and that's why they failed. The more you try to resist it, the more it will consume you. You have to learn to control it, to bend it to your will. How? Ed whispered, doubt clouding his mind. The thought of controlling something so dark, so powerful, felt impossible. He was just a boy. How could he ever hope to bend the will of a demon, let alone the legacy of the Demon King? Cain rose from the table and walked over to a chest in the corner of the cabin. He opened it slowly, revealing an assortment of old weapons, relics of a time long past. From the chest, he retrieved a small, jagged stone. It glowed faintly, pulsing with an eerie red light. He placed it in front of Ed. This is a piece of the abyss, Cain explained, his voice low. A shard of the world where the Demon King resides. It's a link to his power, to his realm. You need to feel it, Ed. Connect with it, not as an enemy, but as a tool. Learn its nature, and only then will you be able to bend it to your will. Ed eyed the stone warily. It radiated with a dark energy that resonated with the power inside him, almost calling to him. His hand hovered over it, fingers twitching as if the stone was beckoning him closer. For a moment, the demon's voice returned, faint but clear in his mind. Embrace it. You will understand. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, and reached out. The moment his fingers made contact with the stone, a shock of cold electricity shot up his arm, racing through his veins and into his heart. His mind swirled with chaotic images of a vast, burning kingdom of shadows, fire licking at the sky, and legions of dark creatures kneeling before a towering figure on a throne made of molten rock. The figure's eyes were pits of glowing red, the very same as the Demon King's emissary that had come for Ed. But here, in this vision, the Demon King's power was limitless. The air itself crackled with it, and the weight of its presence pressed down on Ed, suffocating him. You are mine, Ed. You cannot escape your fate. You will wear the crown. Suddenly, the vision shifted. Ed found himself standing on a cliff overlooking the demon armies, but this time he wasn't the king. He was something else. His own form had changed. His skin was blackened and cracked like charred earth, his eyes burned with the same hellish light, and his hands held the Demon King's scepter. He watched as the world below him crumbled, destroyed by his own hands. With a gasp, Ed pulled his hand away from the stone, staggering back from the table. His breath came in ragged bursts, and his heart hammered in his chest. The cabin around him felt distant, unreal, as though the vision still clung to the edges of his reality. Cain watched him calmly, though there was a sadness in his eyes. That's the power you face, Ed. It will show you everything you fear, everything you could become, but it's only a possibility and not your destiny. I saw myself, Ed stammered, unable to finish the thought. The image of himself as the Demon King haunted him, the weight of the crown crushing his soul. Cain nodded. I know, I've seen the same vision myself, in others. The Demon King's power is seductive, yet it offers strength, control, dominion over life and death. But you have something the others didn't. What's that? A choice. Ed looked up at Cain, his mind still reeling from the vision. How do I choose? It feels like it's already inside me, twisting me into something I don't want to be. Cain knelt beside him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. You choose by fighting for what's right, not just against the power, but against the temptation to use it for your own gain. You have to use the Demon King's strength to undo what he's built. You need to become a force for balance, not destruction. Ed swallowed hard, his thoughts racing. How do I start? Cain rose and gestured for Ed to follow. They left the cabin, stepping out into the cold mountain air. The mist still clung to the peaks around them, and the scent of pine hung in the air. Cain led Ed to a secluded clearing, surrounded by towering trees. In the center of the clearing stood a circle of ancient stones, each inscribed with strange symbols that Ed didn't recognize. This is where you begin, Cain said, stepping into the circle. The power you have is tied to hell itself, but here, you'll learn how to channel it without losing yourself. Ed hesitated at the edge of the circle, staring at the symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "What do I do?" "Stand in the center," Cain instructed. "Focus on the power inside you. Don't fight Ida, let it flow through you. But you must remain in control. If you lose control, it will consume you." Ed nodded, though fear gnawed at the edges of his mind. He stepped into the circle, feeling the stones hum with energy as he crossed the threshold. In the center, the air felt different, heavier, charged with an ancient power that made his skin tingle. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, reaching for the darkness within him. At first, it resisted, like a wild beast thrashing inside a cage. But Ed didn't try to push it away this time. Instead, he let it come, allowed the energy to rise within him. The power surged, cold and sharp, filling his veins with raw, unbridled strength. His muscles tensed, his heart raced, and for a moment, he felt unstoppable. But as the power grew, so did the demon's voice. It whispered in his mind, urging him to let go, to embrace the chaos, to unleash the full force of his strength on the world around him. The ground beneath his feet began to tremble, cracks spreading from the stones as the energy pulsed outward. "Stay in control, Ed." Cain's voice cut through the haze, grounding him. Ed gritted his teeth, struggling to contain the power. His mind fought against the demon's influence, pushing back the whispers, the temptation. He focused on Cain's words, on the image of the world he wanted to protect, not the one he could destroy. Slowly, the trembling subsided, and the power inside him began to settle. It didn't disappear, it was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but Ed had control. For now, he opened his eyes to find Cain watching him, a small smile of approval on his face. "You did it." Ed exhaled shakily, feeling the tension in his body start to ease. "I don't know how long I can keep this up." Cain stepped forward and placed a hand on Ed's shoulder. "You'll get stronger. The more you practice, the easier it will become. But remember, it's not just about controlling the power, it's about controlling yourself." Ed nodded, though doubt still gnawed at the back of his mind. The vision of himself as the Demon King was a constant reminder of what could happen if he ever let his guard down. But for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. He had made it through the first test, and it wouldn't be the last. The days that followed were grueling. Cain pushed Ed to his limits, training him not only in how to control the power but in combat as well. They sparred daily, Cain's sword clashing with Ed's as the young man learned the art of battle. Each swing, each block, was a lesson in discipline, a reminder that strength without control was nothing but chaos. The power inside Ed continued to grow, but so did his ability to master it. He could feel it in every movement, every breath. There were times when the demon's voice would rise again, trying to tempt him into letting go, but Ed held firm. He refused to become the monster the vision had shown him. But the threat of the demon lords still loomed large. They would come for him, he knew that much, and when they did, he would have to be ready. Cain often spoke of the final battle that was to come, of the moment when Ed would have to face not just the demon lords, but the Demon King himself. It would be the ultimate test of his strength and resolve. But Cain also warned him that there would be sacrifices along the way, and that the path to victory would be paved with betrayal. As the days turned into weeks, Ed couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The air felt heavier, the nights darker. He had a sense that the demons were already watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, one night, it happened. Ed was sitting by the fire in Cain's cabin, staring into the flickering flames, when Lyra burst through the door, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "They're here," she gasped, doubling over as she tried to catch her breath. Ed jumped to his feet, his heart racing. "Who's here?" "The demon lords," Lyra said, her voice shaking. "They've found us. They're coming for you." Ed's blood ran cold. He had known this moment would come, but he wasn't ready. "Not yet." Cain stood in the doorway, his face grim. "We have no time. Get your sword, Ed. This is the moment we've been preparing for." Ed grabbed his weapon, the weight of it familiar in his hand. But as he followed Cain and Lyra out into the night, He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The clearing outside the cabin was eerily quiet, the air thick with tension. And then, from the shadows, they emerged. The demon lords. Ed counted 3 of them, each one more terrifying than the last. Their twisted, hulking forms seemed to radiate darkness, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. The largest of them stepped forward, a cruel smile curling on its lips. "You cannot escape your destiny, boy," the demon lord growled, its voice like the grinding of stone. "The throne is waiting for you." Ed tightened his grip on his sword, his heart pounding in his chest. This was Ida, the moment of truth. But as he prepared to fight, he couldn't help but glance at Lyra. There was something in her eyes, something that sent a chill down his spine. Betrayal. The realization hit him like a blow to the chest. Lyra wasn't just afraid, she was guilty. Before he could react, she stepped forward, her hand outstretched toward the demon lord. "I've done what you asked," she said, her voice trembling. "Now give me what you promised." The demon lord grinned, its teeth sharp and gleaming in the moonlight. "You've done well, Lyra. Your reward will be more than you could ever imagine." Ed felt his heart sink as the betrayal unfolded before him. Lyra had led the demons to him. Everything she had said, everything she had done, had been a lie. "Why?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Lyra's gaze flickered with a mix of regret and fear. "I had no choice, Ed. They promised me power of freedom from all this." Cain stepped forward, his sword drawn. "You've made a mistake, Lyra." "The demons don't keep their promises." The demon lord's grin widened as it stepped toward Ed. "Enough talk. It's time for you to fulfill your destiny." Ed's body tensed as the power inside him surged. The demon's voice rose in his mind, louder than ever before. "This is your moment, Ed. Embrace the power. Become what you were meant to be." But Ed didn't want to become the monster in his visions. He wanted to break the cycle, to end the Demon King's reign once and for all. With a roar, Ed unleashed the power inside him. The ground shook beneath his feet, and the air crackled with dark energy. He could feel the demon's strength coursing through him, but he didn't let it control him. This time, he was in control. The battle began, and Ed fought with a fury he had never known. His sword clashed with the demon lord's, each strike reverberating through the night. Cain fought beside him, his movements swift and precise, but even with their combined strength, the demons were relentless. Ed's muscles burned with effort, but he refused to give up. He couldn't let the demons win. He couldn't let Lyra's betrayal be the end of everything he had fought for. And then, in a moment of sheer desperation, Ed called upon the full force of the Demon King's power. The energy exploded from him, a blinding wave of darkness that consumed everything in its path. When the light faded, the clearing was silent. The demon lords were gone, their bodies nothing but ash on the wind. Cain stood nearby, his sword lowered, his face solemn. And Lyra? She was gone. Ed fell to his knees, his breath ragged, his body trembling from the effort. The power inside him had quieted, but he knew it wasn't gone. It was still there, waiting for the next moment of weakness. Cain approached him, his expression unreadable. "You did it," he said quietly. "But this is only the beginning." Ed nodded, though he barely heard the words. His mind was still reeling from the battle, from the betrayal. But there was no time to dwell on it. He had a throne to destroy,